Allen Lazard might want to stay with the Jets instead of being traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I have one piece of advice for the Jets. Trade Lazard for whatever you can get for him. That and more today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, June 9th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Well, it's June, which means there's not a lot going on, and that can only mean one thing. The media is cooking up some wild trade rumors. We'll talk about rumors that have spread about the Jets potentially adding a big-name tight end and a big-name wide receiver. But we'll begin by talking about a player currently on the Jets who's subject to trade rumors right now, and that is Allen Lazard. And the trade rumors about Lazard potentially going to the Pittsburgh Steelers have picked up in the last couple of days, with the Steelers officially agreeing to terms with Aaron Rodgers. Over the last couple of months, it's been a topic of speculation because it felt very likely that Rodgers would end up in Pittsburgh. And of course, he and Lazard have a long-time connection going back to their Green Bay days and continuing to their days with the New York Jets. Rodgers was obviously a big reason the Jets gave Lazard a 4-year, $44 million contract 2 years ago. And if we're being honest, Lazard's Jets career has been terrible. He has been an enormous free agent bust to the point where he actually had to accept a massive pay cut this offseason. His salary went all the way down to $2.25 million. And again, this was a guy who signed a contract 2 years ago worth $11 million a year. And the fact he felt he had to accept that shows that he didn't think he could get more than that on the open market. Because if you felt like you could get more than $2.25 million on the open market, you would just tell the team, cut you. And then you'll go sign a new contract worth more money. Well, there's a bit of an interesting piece of information that popped up from Mike Florio on Pro Football Talk late last week. And it suggests that Lazard may not want to go to Pittsburgh. Florio wrote in Pro Football Talk, per a source with knowledge of Lazard's thinking, he sees a very real potential benefit to proving his ability to function at an acceptable level without Rodgers as his quarterback. With the Jets planning a run-heavy offense under new coach Aaron Glenn and new quarterback Justin Fields, there's a premium on receiver blocking. At 6 feet 5 inches and 225 pounds, Lazard fits that role perfectly. So Lazard might want to go out there and prove, hey, I can produce without Aaron Rodgers. And if you're Lazard, I guess that makes some sense. But if you're the Jets, I think the move is obvious. If the Pittsburgh Steelers offer you anything for Allen Lazard, anything at all, you should take it. Because Allen Lazard is not part of the solution for this offense. He's not going to be part of the solution this year. He's not going to be part of the solution going forward. The Jets are really thin at wide receiver right now. So I've seen a couple of analysts say, well, if the Jets want to win games, they got to keep Lazard. And when I hear that, I ask myself, are we talking about the same Allen Lazard here? We're talking about the guy who can't run routes and who can't catch passes. And even though he's 6'5", 225, can't win contested catches and gets out fought at the point of attack. Like, what's Allen Lazard bringing to the table? Almost anything you could get for him is going to be more valuable. I mean, I don't care if it's a 7th round pick. 7th round pick, you at least has a shot at being a player for you, not just this year, not just immediately, but going forward. Allen Lazard's not going to help you at all this year. And yeah, I understand the Jets receiver room is thin, but you're telling me there's nobody else on the roster, even with how thin it is, nobody else on the roster can produce what Allen Lazard can produce. Josh Reynolds can't. Arian Smith can't. Even Xavier Gipson, Tyler Johnson. I mean, I don't think Lazard's much better than any of these guys. In sports over the last couple of decades, as the statistical revolution has advanced, a concept has come into view called the replacement level player. The replacement level player is essentially the free agent who's available. If you need to replace somebody on your roster and need to sign somebody, that's the guy you can sign. The guy who's not signed by any team, the guy you sign off the street. And essentially that player's quality is viewed as a replacement level player. I don't know that Lazard's much better than a replacement level player. I don't know that he's better than any of the other receivers I mentioned on this Jets offense. I mean, it's almost like because like the receiver room is so shaky right now for the Jets, people have decided that Lazard's better than he really is. He's just not a guy that brings much to the table. Now, the one caveat I'll have here, literally the only argument for keeping Lazard I understand is something Florio did right, which is that the Jets are probably heading to a run-heavy offense. I think that in neutral situations, in situations where the Jets aren't far behind, or in situations where the Jets aren't facing a 3rd and long, or when we're outside of the 2-minute drill, neutral situations, when all things are equal, Jets are probably going to have one of the heaviest run rates in the league. And a lot of that's just based on the personnel they've got. Justin Fields, a quarterback, a guy who's a very dynamic runner, a guy who's developing as a passer. In the backfield, very talented runner in Breece Hall, who, subject to a trade rumor we'll discuss in a little bit, which I'm not sure I believe, but talented runner Breece Hall, 2 young backs who, you could see have potential in Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. How good will they be? We'll find out this year. And the receiver room, give Garrett Wilson. And then I guess the next guy people are talking about is Allen Lazard, and Allen Lazard's a better blocker than a receiver. So Aaron Glenn has alluded to the idea that, he wants his receivers to be able to block. And I get it, because, you're heading towards an offense which is going to be very run heavy. Yeah, it will help to have receivers who can block, but the position's still called wide receiver. Catching the football is important. Running routes is important. That's what these guys ultimately get paid for. Garrett Wilson's not going to be a great blocker. You want to say, oh, you have to be able to block in this offense. Well, Garrett Wilson's not going to be able to block that effectively. He's a little undersized. He's not that physical. He'll be great in this offense. You're not going to bench Garrett Wilson because he can't block. And on the same note, just because Lazard can block doesn't mean that he's super valuable to this offense. I can buy that, maybe he has a little bit more value now because he's a guy that gives a lot of effort as a blocker. He's obviously very big, and if you've watched his film in the past, there have been moments where he's been able to go one-on-one with even a defensive lineman and throw an effective block. He's not consistent, but he's got the ability to be a pretty effective blocker. So I understand, that's fine. But how many times in a season does a wide receiver block really spring a big play? And is Lazard the only guy that can throw that block? How much excess value are you really adding with Allen Lazard? Now, I don't know if the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to want Allen Lazard. The Steelers are obviously one of the better run organizations in the league. So they're going to avoid, I think that they're going to avoid some of the pitfalls the Jets fell into with Aaron Rodgers, because when the Jets traded for Aaron Rodgers, they didn't just trade for Rodgers. They brought in a bunch of Rodgers' friends. They brought in Lazard. They brought in Randall Cobb. There were other guys they brought in. Of course, last year they traded for Devontae Adams. Nathaniel Hackett's continued employment with the Jets was due primarily to Rodgers. I don't think that's going to happen. That's not going to happen. It's obviously not going to happen to the same extent, because Rodgers' friends aren't really around, and they're not going to bring in Nathaniel Hackett. Would they bring in Lazard? Would they have interest in Lazard? The Steelers are one of the better organizations in the league. Now, they haven't handled the quarterback position very smart the last couple of years, and I would even include this offseason. I don't think that they were very smart in bringing in Rodgers. Would they want a receiver who, maybe has chemistry with Rodgers? I don't know. But if they do, just take whatever you can get for him. This guy's not going to be on the team in 2026. This guy has not been helpful to you in 2 years. This guy's contribution, even if he is a good blocker, is not really going to be that meaningful to this team. Again, how many big plays are going to be broken because of an Allen Lazard block? Like 1 or 2 during the season? And are you telling me another receiver can't throw a block to spring Justin Fields on a big run or Breece Hall on a big run in those situations? There's really no reason to keep Allen Lazard if there's an ability to find somebody better. When the Jets renegotiated Allen Lazard's contract, I didn't have a big problem with it because, they pretty much negotiated him down close to the league minimum. And at that point, it's fine keeping him. But I'm not going to say Lazard being on the team is a good thing. You can get anything for Lazard. Look, if at the trade deadline last year, if a team offered you a 7 for Lazard, would you have taken it? I'm sure you would have. So why would that change now? Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention from sending a bad player out to potentially bringing some good players in. There is a big name receiver out there, maybe looking for a new contract, who some people are speculating may be available. I am very skeptical the Jets are going to be able to make a trade for Terry McLaurin from Washington, and I'll explain why as we can. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but I'll explain why as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's very easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Maybe the Jets should have been using Monarch Money the last couple of years to manage their salary cap. Well, you can take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Well, it's June, and that means, there's not a lot going on. I mean, you will have mandatory mini camps for the teams as they conclude their offseason program, but there's not going to be a lot of news generated from most of them. Last year was an exception for the Jets because you had two big pieces of news. You had Aaron Rodgers going to Egypt. You had Hassan Reddick holding out. But for most teams, this time of year is pretty quiet, and there's not a lot of content to be produced. So content creators across the NFL start coming up with trade ideas. And out of Washington, Terry McLaurin, there have been reports from Jordan Schultz that there's some issues with McLaurin. He's not happy with his current contract. He wants a raise. So now we start getting some articles about potential trades for Terry McLaurin. So there was one written by Bleacher Report by Christopher Knox, and he wrote an article where he came up with 6 hypothetical trades for McLaurin, and one of them involved the Jets. So in this hypothetical trade, the Jets are sending Breece Hall and their second-round pick next year to Washington. In exchange, they get Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler, and a 5th-round pick. And, I think that there are lots of different angles here. And I think it's easy in situations like this to see a big name and hope the Jets go out and get him. And that's kind of been like the story of the Jets the last couple of years. Whenever there's been a big name out, the Jets have gone out and gotten him. And I think now maybe you can see that just because a big name's available, just because it's a good player, just because the guy's had a good career, it doesn't always mean that player is the right fit for your team. Now, what I would say is that if Terry McLaurin was available and, you didn't have to give up anything to get him except money, and he wanted a market level contract, he'd be a great signing. Now, he's about to turn 30, but his age actually doesn't bother me that much. Sometimes I'll get a mailbag question where somebody suggests signing an old player, and it'll be prefaced with prefaced by saying, John, I know you'll disagree with this because you don't want older players. It's not that I never want older players. It's just you can't build a team entirely around old players. If you look at what the Jets have done the last couple of years, they've really leaned into bringing in and depending on older players. In 2023, you had Aaron Rodgers brought in, and you were leaning on Dwayne Brown, who was in his late 30s. And there were other older guys that were brought in, Al Woods. Then last year, the Jets, over the course of last year, the Jets had 4 guys who were either 30 or turning 30 who they really leaned on, who were recent additions. Rodgers was one of them. Now, Rodgers, of course, had been traded. They traded for Rodgers 2 years ago, but they were depending on Rodgers. Then they had 3 big acquisitions during the offseason or in season: the Hassan Reddick trade, this Mike Williams signing, and the Devontae Adams trade. And of those 4 guys who were aging, Adams was the only one who was really good at that point. I think that if you bring in one older guy here or there to fill a specific need, it can be a good move. And I think if you got McLaurin on a reasonable deal, it would make sense, because I think it goes beyond age. You also have to ask yourself, is a player's game likely to age well? And in the case of Terry McLaurin, the answer is yes. Guys who depend on their athleticism, guys who really depend on speed or quickness, those are the guys I'm really skeptical about as they get closer to 30, because those are the things that tend to go. Guys who win on technique tend to age better. And McLaurin's much more a technique guy. He's a very savvy route runner. He knows how to set defenders up. He knows how to change the speeds, the tempos of his route. In baseball, the pitcher who throws 100 isn't always very effective. The guy who throws, 93, but then also throws a changeup that's 77, 75 can be very effective. It's about can you change speeds effectively as much as anything. And McLaurin like changes speeds with his routes very well. He's a very effective route runner. Route running ages well. McLaurin's been a guy who's been a very consistent receiver through his career. He's been over 900 yards every single year of his career. And every year since his rookie season, he's been between 1,000 and 1,200 yards. In fact, I thought like last year, one of the feel-good stories of the playoffs was Terry McLaurin, a guy who's suffered a bad Washington team since 2019, finally getting a chance to play in big games and seeing his team win and go to the NFC Championship game, which brings me to a key point here. If you're the Washington Commanders and you just went to the NFC Championship game last year and you just rode your rookie quarterback, Daniels, who had a fantastic rookie season, and why would you be willing to give up a guy like Terry McLaurin, a guy who's a consistent 1,000-yard receiver? Something doesn't add up there. If McLaurin's available, it probably means something's up. It probably means he wants a contract that's totally unreasonable, or maybe Washington knows something that suggests maybe he's more likely to decline than his route running suggests. But from the Jets standpoint, again, a lot of this goes back to price. If the Washington Commanders aren't able to work out a deal with McLaurin, I think the simplest explanation is that he just wants way too much money. He just wants a crazy deal because his hometown team, the team he spent his entire career with, the team he's a homegrown player from, won't want to pay him. Then, odds are he wants a crazy contract. And for the pleasure of giving him this crazy contract, you'd have to give up a second-round pick and a guy who's probably one of your top 5 players. It's not like McLaurin's coming in and it's just addition. You're also subtracting a second-round pick, which is a very important pick, but also a guy who is actually good in Breece Hall. So it's fun to speculate about this stuff. It's fun to like cook up these trades in the offseason, but why would Washington just want to give up Terry McLaurin for nothing? It probably would take a pretty compelling package to pry him away from Washington. And if the Commanders are willing to give him up, something's up there. Now, I think what will probably happen is Washington and McLaurin will work out a deal because it's in Washington's very incentivized to try and work out a longer-term deal with a guy who's been as consistent of a receiver for them, because this is a team that obviously has big expectations for the season. This was a team that came a game away from the Super Bowl with a rookie quarterback and with a first-year head coach with experience as a head coach in the NFL before in Dan Quinn. But still, this was the first year of a new regime, first year of a new owner, first year of a new GM, and they had a lot of success. So everything's incentivized for Washington to work out a deal with McLaurin. And you'd have to think like a McLaurin who suffered so many bad seasons with Washington would want to stay there. And after investing so much time in this franchise and being through so much losing, you'd want to be there for the bright days for the franchise. So it's very unlikely. I think it's unlikely McLaurin gets traded, but even if he is, it's really tough to see how this works out for the Jets. And of course, because they're in New York, the Jets are going to be speculated about every big name who becomes available. That's just, it comes with the territory. But I think the days of the Jets chasing big names, at least for now, is over, because we saw last year, we saw 2 years ago that just because a guy has a big name doesn't mean that he's always the right fit. And price matters a lot. A guy can be a good player. A guy can be a great addition at a certain price, but not an ideal fit at a different price. And I think for McLaurin, the price would simply be too high. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're not done talking about big name pass catching targets, because there's a tight end from Baltimore who is rumored to maybe be available. Could the Jets swing a deal for Mark Andrews? I think it's unlikely. I think it's a little bit less unlikely than trading for Terry McLaurin, but I don't know why Baltimore would make him available. And I'll explain why as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We're talking about trades because it's that time of year in the NFL where not a lot is going on, so people are cooking up trade rumors. So the other day on NFL.com, a number of analysts were asked to write about the trade they want to see happen before the start of the regular season. And there was one contributor to NFL.com, Brooke Cersomino, who wrote she thinks Mark Andrews of Baltimore should be traded to the New York Jets. And what Brooks Ursamino wrote was, there's been some speculation this offseason about the Ravens moving their longtime tight end. He's been a very reliable player, minus the drop in the divisional round, but this is a business. Andrews is a free agent in 2026, and with Baltimore needing to allocate money elsewhere, the team could save $11 million against the cap and gain future draft capital by trading him. In come the Jets, who are in the middle of a rebuild and need more pieces to help Justin Fields jumpstart the offense. New York did draft Mason Taylor in the second round, but bringing in Andrews for a year to help aid this unit and mentor the rookie makes sense. Now, I will say this. I do think that like this idea is a little bit more logical than the idea of the Jets trading for Terry McLaurin. And I think it's more likely Andrews gets traded than McLaurin for the reasons that were laid out in the article. And I do think, like, in theory, Andrews would be a very good fit for the New York Jets because, he can still play pretty effectively. Again, another guy who's 30, but another guy who I think is going to age very well, because Mark Andrews' game has all been about like a lot of subtlety, is about finding the hole in the defense, getting into that soft spot and moving the chains. And he also would be like a really good fit just because, like, one of the things I've talked about with Mason Taylor is you may have to keep your expectations low with him because, he's a bit of a work in progress. And in an ideal world, I think Mason Taylor would come to a team with an established tight end like a Mark Andrews and just kind of be able to get a limited number of snaps, work on his technique blocking, run limited routes, but the offense could lean on the other tight end more. And also, like, with Justin Fields in the mix, if you're looking to maybe copy the offense Baltimore's run with Lamar Jackson, and Fields is no Lamar, but if you're looking to run a similar offense, we know Baltimore's used those tight ends a lot. Baltimore loves using big personnel packages, lots of tight ends, load the field up with tight ends, play power football. But also Lamar likes throwing to tight ends, and Justin Fields has been a pretty effective thrower to tight ends through his career. He's a guy who historically has liked throwing to tight ends. So Andrews would actually be a pretty good fit. My skepticism with this is whether Baltimore would trade him. Now, Andrews is not as important to Baltimore as McLaurin is to Washington. But as we've talked about, even as Isaiah likely has taken on a bigger role in Baltimore and maybe edged out Andrews as their top tight end, Andrews is still an important player. Baltimore still likes to go big in their personnel packages. And obviously next year, Baltimore is still going to be looking to win a Super Bowl. And the Ravens are also like one of the best teams in the NFL at playing the compensatory pick game. Compensatory picks go to teams that lose free agents and essentially lose more than they gain in free agency. So I get the feeling like this is educated guess from me, but my guess is that Baltimore would look at this and say, well, we can get a fourth round pick for Mark Andrews this year, or we can let him go and we can play this season out and let him go in free agency and get a compensatory fourth round pick next year. And if you play the season out, you get another year of production for Mark Andrews. So I think that I would probably lean towards Baltimore focusing on the here and now, because in order to be able to land Andrews, you'd have to give Baltimore, first of all, a better pick than they think they would get from simply letting him walk in free agency next year and collecting the comp pick. So now we're raising the price on what the Jets would have to pay. And if the Jets give up a high pick for Andrews, then there'd be a lot of pressure on them to re-sign him and extend him. And again, he's not a 30-year-old where the age bothers me as much, because I think this is another guy who I would think has a pretty good shot of being effective well into his 30s. But you never want to put yourself in a position where you feel like you have to re-sign a guy. And you see this happen a lot in the NFL, where a team gives up a draft pick, they give up an enormous draft haul to trade for a player, and they don't settle the contract situation right then. And then the player gains all the leverage, because the team gave up a lot of draft picks to get this guy. And this happens over and over in the NFL. And if you let this guy go, you've wasted all those draft picks on a very short-term gain. So I just don't think it's going to line up for the New York Jets to be able to get a player like Mark Andrews. I would encourage that. Like, if we're talking about like trades that like actually make sense for this team before the season, a guy like Andrews would make a tremendous amount of sense, in part because the Jets don't have many reliable pass-catching options, and Andrews could help fill some of that void. At this point, is Andrews a good second option? My guess is he's more of a third option, but I don't know if the Jets have a good third option at this point. So, behind Garrett Wilson, he'd probably be the second option. Breece Hall would be the third option. I mean, that's not ideal, but it's at least something. It's at least more workable than what you've got right now. And you have the aspect where he could mentor Mason Taylor, where you'd be the number one tight end for at least a year, and you could run 2 tight end sets, Andrews and Taylor. If Taylor develops a year from now and you re-sign Andrews, it'd be a pretty dynamic duo at the tight end position. My dream is to one day see the Jets have a really good tight ends duo. We've struggled getting one good tight end in here for years. I mean, one of my go-to frustrations with the New York Jets every single year is how dismal the tight end position is for this team. I mean, when over the course of a 15-year stretch, Tyler Conklin's probably your best guy. It's not exactly a team that's done well bringing in tight ends. But I think it's going to be tough to pull off. Could Baltimore want to do it? Maybe. Look, they're not going to do it because he dropped a 2-point conversion in the playoff game last year. That's not the way Baltimore operates. The Ravens are too smart to panic trade a player just because he made a big gaffe in a key spot in a playoff game. So anybody who thinks the Ravens are just going to panic trade him or overreact to what happened a year ago in Buffalo, that's not going to happen. They know Andrews is a valuable player. He's been a very productive player for them through the years. He's valuable. He's even a guy they've utilized as like a tush-push quarterback. Even with Lamar Jackson, Ravens use Andrews as like kind of a gadget guy in short yardage situations, as a guy who gets the snap and is pushed forward for the first down. So it's a guy with a guy who brings a lot to the table for Baltimore. Again, I'd be happy to see the Jets make a move as long as presuming they don't give up too much for him, because I think he's actually the kind of guy who could really help the Jets. It's just, I think that this is one of those June trades where you could talk yourself into it, but I get the feeling, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I get the feeling Andrews is just too valuable for Baltimore for this to actually happen. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back next time to talk more Jets.